Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Electrification Coalition's Charging Infrastructure webinar. My name is Alyssa Linkle, and I'm EV Infrastructure Associate at the Electrification Coalition and your facilitator for today's discussion. A lot of our other webinars have focused heavily on federal funding opportunities and deployment of EVSE for light-duty vehicles. But today, we're going to learn a bit more about medium and heavy-duty electrification and charging and discuss how cities can collaborate with and benefit from clean truck transportation. This is an action-packed agenda, so feel free to send your questions through the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to get to them during our brief Q&A at the end. To start us off, I'll pass things over to Rick, the Director of Emerging Technologies at NACFE, who will give us a pulse on the medium and heavy-duty market. Rick has authored NACFE's guidance reports on electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and other alternative fuel, medium, and heavy-duty trucks. Other reports include technology confidence reports and insights on efficiency, aerodynamics, platooning, regional haul, and production. As president of Mihalik Vehicle Consulting, he has 43 years of experience in the trucking and aerospace industries, including 20 years in commercial vehicle development for PACCAR and Peterbilt. So Rick, take it away.
Thank you, Alyssa. I think this is a pretty exciting time to be in freight transportation. Let's see if we can go to our slides, please. So NACFE has been around, NACFE has been around 15 years this week. This is our anniversary. We are an unbiased source of information for industry and regulators and the public. Everything's available free on our website. We have a number of reports on electric and zero-emission vehicles that are available for download. And we also talk to the infrastructure side of those equations. So in summary, very quickly, BVs are in production right now. There are numerous models available from countless OEMs. We seem to have new OEMs showing up every day. The EVSE is out there and available. The charging connectors have been resolved, and that's heading towards having one for heavy duty and one for light duty. Utilities are participating in providing power. They're just starting to ramp up on that. There's a national corridor plan for where to put all this equipment and a national blueprint for zero emission. And there's a number of funding incentives out there already. So we did a One on Less event last September where we demonstrated for over 3 weeks several of these vehicles at electric depots where there were significant numbers of vehicles installed already. Along with the vehicles, what's new in freight is that you have to put power in for them. So these are all essentially return to base operations, and there are a number of suppliers for EVSE equipment now. As I said, the connector situation is working itself out. Later this year, we should have standards on both high power and medium and low power charging. One of the universal truths that we found in talking to over 40 of the drivers of these vehicles is that they absolutely love these vehicles. And most of them, once they get exposed to them, really do not want to go back to fossil fueled vehicles for a number of reasons. A little bit on the reality of numbers. The marketplace has 8 to 10 million vehicles in it. Those are replaced annually at a rate of about 200 to 300,000 heavy-duty vehicles a year and 200 to 300,000 medium-duty ones. So if you think about that, even if every new vehicle produced had this new technology in it, it would still take upwards of 20 years to migrate into the industry. It's just the harsh reality of this marketplace is that you cannot instantaneously solve these issues. There is inertia to overcome. Now, we've been studying battery electric vehicles now for several years, and one of the challenge is that oftentimes people default to long haul heavy duty trucks as being the space that everybody talks about. But the majority of the vehicles out there, out of that 8 to 10 million vehicles, are lower class, lower range vehicles. And so the green in this slide shows the vehicles where battery electric technology is most suited. When you get to long haul, you need to be talking about alternative fuels and hydrogen fuel cells. Now, one of the other realities here is that 40% of the vehicles that are produced in the industry each year are day cabs. Now, that inherently means that 40% or more of the marketplace is hauling less than 250 miles a day. And a good deal of that, over 40% of that market space, is under 100 miles per day. Now, the national blueprint was issued by the government last year. It shows that there are a mix of technologies planned for the future. It is not a one-size-fits-all situation. I'll get into that a little bit more later. The reality is that we will need a whole mix of technologies as we move forward. This is a slide we put together some time ago talking about that each of these technologies has a sweet spot where they are better optimized for performance. So battery electric vehicles are typically better suited for lower ranges, lower freight weights, and things like RNG, renewable diesel, fuel cells are really best suited for higher range, higher weight vehicles. And then there's an opportunity for a number of hybrid solutions in between those two. Now, where are these vehicles going in? CalSTART has published and maintains a count of where these vehicles are registered. Now, they may not all be operating in these states because vehicles run in different states than where they're registered sometimes. But this shows that every state has a play in zero-emission vehicles today. This is the recent EV corridor plan that was issued. This is the phase one. It kind of highlights where these technologies are going to be best suited and prioritized initially. In time, this will roll out nationwide, but these are the focus areas for the near term. We also need to talk about hydrogen. There's a great deal of interest in hydrogen. There's a lot of reasons for this. I will mention that hydrogen is a lot more than the truck. There are a lot of regional factors involved and economic factors, employment, and a number of other things. So the DOE has issued money to hydrogen hubs. Where they're located is on this map. And these are kind of the priority areas to initially look at those. There are a couple vehicles that are being produced today that are hydrogen fuel cell. There are more in prototype and in discussion for production. But I think the main point I want to bring out here is that the current vehicles are really slated at 200 to 400 mile ranges. So you're still not talking yet about long haul vehicles. And they're just learning to crawl with these vehicles, and the marketplace will eventually evolve to creating long range versions of these. But right now they're shorter range. We introduced results from our Run on Less event. These are available online. Essentially, I'll leave you to hunt these down yourself, but the fundamental conclusion is that the marketplace is ready now to support these vehicles in volume. And they're being rolled out in electric depots at scale across the United States. A large majority of them are in California, but we're seeing growth in many other states and in Canada. These are where we initially looked at things last September. As I said, they are all over the US and Canada now. And with that, I will transfer back.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rick. That was a super insightful level set for the group and provides us with a more realistic view of what electrifying freight will look like now. So now that we're all on the same page about the rapidly developing electric freight sector, Catherine Ittner with C40 will dive further into the urban freight space and provide more detail about how cities and businesses can get involved with these efforts. So Catherine is the Senior Program Manager for C40's Zero Emission Freight Program and is working to help cities overcome barriers to electrifying and decarbonizing the freight sector. In this role, Catherine facilitates peer-to-peer knowledge sharing among C40 cities, primarily in Europe and North America, as well as managing technical assistance projects and providing opportunities for city business collaboration. Cities focuses on a wide range of urban freight topics, including heavy-duty vehicle electrification and decarbonizing last-mile delivery. Prior to C40, Catherine spent nearly a decade at the Environmental Defense Fund working on clean energy, clean air, and transport, and Catherine has lived in 5 C40 cities: Houston, Buenos Aires, Austin, London, and now NYC. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Alyssa, and thanks to everyone for being here today. If you could bring up the slides, please. So as Alyssa said, I work with C40 cities, and I work specifically on urban freight and helping our cities reduce pollution from urban freight systems. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to discuss here today, tell you a little bit about C40, a little bit about the common goals and barriers that we see in urban freight, then on what are some high-level things that both cities and businesses can do to advance the transition to zero emission. And then I'll do some regional spotlights of kind of work that C40 is doing in this topic in different parts of the world and just different ways that cities are leading on this. And the Q&A will actually, I think, be at the end of everyone's presentation. So. Okay, great. So for anyone who's not familiar with C40, we are a network of nearly 100 cities around the world that have committed to ambitious climate action. C40, we provide support to our cities and our mayors to help them meet their goals on a number of topics. Transport is one of them, but covers kind of a wide scope of things, including waste, air quality, energy, et cetera. And within our transport team, we have an overarching vision that is leading to what our cities want to see and what we feel was best. So it's kind of a mix of things. Electrification is a piece of this. It's not the only piece. It's also talking about how do we create cities that are better, more enjoyable, more accessible places for people to live, work, and move around in. So it's also about how do we use our public space? How do we keep people safe as they're walking and cycling? But in addition to, of course, reducing emissions and prioritizing those high mileage vehicles for electrification, many of which are medium and heavy duty vehicles. Our role, we do a lot of knowledge sharing, so bringing together cities, peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, but as Alyssa mentioned, also managing some technical assistance projects, so kind of doing deep dive on the ground. This picture that you see here is in Los Angeles, and that was a project that we worked on with them where they were introducing zero emission commercial vehicle loading spaces. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but kind of helping to understand, how is this impacting downtown LA and what do small businesses need was one project that we worked on. So on urban freight goals, I think I always like to talk about this because this is an area where both cities and businesses have a lot of shared goals. It might not be the same weight. Of course, if you're a private sector, you've got shareholders, bottom line, et cetera. But this is kind of what most cities are working toward: better air quality, less climate pollution, but also a lot on traffic congestion and safety. And how do we reach those goals? I've put them in kind of two very broad buckets of electrifying our large vehicles, but also creating more efficient urban logistics systems. And then in terms of barriers, so in having conversations with our city officials, but also private sector representatives, these are some of the biggest barriers that we see coming up. I think it's really great to hear from Rick and know that one of the barriers used to be that there weren't models available, that these trucks just didn't exist. And that is not really the case anymore. There's so many available out there. Charging is getting figured out, but there's still a lot of challenges, and costs remains a big one, particularly for smaller businesses and independent owner operators when you're talking about a much more expensive upfront cost and a less developed secondhand market for these vehicles. But I would also point out that lack of public-private collaboration continues to be a bit of a challenge, where sometimes cities feel like they don't necessarily know how the freight industry works, or they think it's just a private sector issue. And so obviously that's something we're trying to help with, so that cities can understand, what is their role, how can they get that knowledge and expertise from the private sector and work together on those shared goals. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I think they're pretty self-explanatory. So I wanted to share a little bit about an event that we held last year, which we called the City Business Roundtable, and we invited representatives from 10 different businesses in Europe, and we had staff from 6 different European cities, and we kind of all just sat down together and talked about a number of challenges that cities and businesses are facing in the transition to zero emission. We also talked a lot about, in Europe, low emission zones and moving towards zero emission areas. But I wanted to just include this because there were a couple of common themes that came out of this on overarching actions that cities and businesses can take. And I'll just go through these quickly. So on the city side, there was really a demand to say, make sure you're putting freight on the agenda. There's a lot of focus within cities on passenger transport. How do individuals get around, which of course is very important, but make sure that you're talking about freight and goods movement within cities. Providing that regulatory certainty. So can you let the private sector know what is coming and how, help them make investment decisions based on regulations and policies that are coming down the line. Building internal capacity, so having staff dedicated to the topic. Serving as an enabler, this is all about using city power to bring people together, to convene, to facilitate, to connect. So really, kind of connected to putting it on the agenda, but helping others reach these goals, and then creating forums for public-private knowledge sharing. And then on the business side, what we heard was from cities is, make those commitments, put yourself out there, make these goals, also building internal capacity. And by this, it was, don't just have staff that's necessarily working on it, but staff that's able to participate and give feedback to cities on pilots, on policy ideas. Make sure you have, it takes time when you want to go to conferences, when you want to speak on webinars, that kind of thing. So having that internal capacity from the private sector side. Leading on innovation, most of the private sector representatives said, we have that capacity and we don't need cities to tell us exactly which direction to go in. We just let us lead. And starting now, don't wait. That was really important one, I think, because some might be a little more cautious and say, well, we want to see kind of how things shake out, but we really don't have time for that. And then once you do start, you can start sharing those lessons and the data with others. Okay, so now I'm going to I mentioned regional spotlight, just talk about a few things that are happening in different regions. I work a lot with North American cities, and to address that challenge of cost, there are several cities that are trying to help out with some financial incentives. So these are 2 different examples. Seattle, really trying something pretty novel, I'd say, with a pilot to reach independent owner operators and help them with the cost of buying a new electric truck. So that's still in the works. It's really the first time a city has tried that. So I think they're figuring out the best way to manage it. New York has a program where you can get a rebate or assistance in retrofitting a truck or going toward an electric truck purchase. And they've expanded that from kind of certain areas into others. Financial incentives, it can work the other way as well, where you might give a discount on particular fees or commercial vehicle permits, things like that. And then on the last mile delivery side in North America, there's a lot of really exciting approaches that are being trialed. So as I mentioned, in Los Angeles, they have introduced some zero emission commercial loading spaces. So these are curbside spaces that are dedicated to zero emission vehicles. And at the moment, it's just an incentive. So it's in addition to the existing loading spaces, but eventually hoping to have enough of them that it creates a bit of a network effect. Portland is going to be trialing similarly a zero emission delivery zone this summer, and that involves digitization of the curb. And Montreal has had a really successful cargo bike and micro hub for deliveries pilot. And then another project that C40 is working on is something called Lane Shift. And this has 2 focus regions, one of which is Latin America. And we're working with 6 cities in Latin America on trying to accelerate the transition to zero emission trucks. Within each city, we have a different project. Some of it is around sort of municipal procurement or trial of e-garbage trucks. I think it's also really interesting that my colleagues that are working on this are looking at how do you develop loans for purchasing these vehicles. So creating concessional loans that have better rates just because they are expensive. And so trying to increase the access to finance for electric trucks. And India is the other focus region for our lane shift project. That is a bit different because whereas Latin America has more of a focus on within the cities, lane shift is a bit more about, and India is a bit more between cities, looking at developing something that we're calling an EV highway. So how can a truck go between places and have all the charging that it needs to get back and forth? But there's also quite a bit on just myth busting around the future of electric transport in India, and how do you think about kind of workers in this transition and make sure that they're supported as well. And in Europe, so I wanted to just highlight a few examples from cities in Europe. Rotterdam is a really interesting one. The Netherlands is requiring cities to introduce zero emission logistics zones. So this would be where only all new vehicles have to be zero emission to enter the city center. And then at a certain point, only zero emission vans and trucks will be able to enter this area in the city. And so Rotterdam created something that they were calling their covenant, where they convened several businesses and asked them to all make commitments and help kind of build toward this transition to zero emission. So some businesses would say, okay, not only are we going to pilot trucks, but we're going to share knowledge with all of these small businesses, or kind of, just different ways of helping creating that enabling ecosystem. They also have a project called EcoStars, which started as an EU project, and then Rotterdam saw success in it and they decided to continue it, but they have logistics advisors available. So if fleets are saying, we know about this zero emission zone that's coming in, how do we get ready for that? Well, these advisors are available to give them advice and best practices based on other companies in the city. London has a number of city business knowledge exchange platforms, one of which is the Freight Forum, another is Low City. I've had the pleasure of attending some of these myself in person when I used to live in London, and it's an opportunity for that two-way knowledge sharing where the city can talk about different policies that it has, get feedback from the private sector about, what do they think about these policies, but what do they need? What are they looking at? And I think the consistency of these meetings has been really valuable for the city in building those relationships. And I also wanted to highlight the scrappage scheme, which is a financial incentive that London offers, where you can turn in your fossil fuel vehicle and receive funding that you can put toward purchasing one that is cleaner and will be able to access the ultra low emission zone. And finally, this was just a kind of newer concept that I've recently learned about, called a logistics hotel, which is basically providing space within the city for logistics activity. Warehouse demand for urban warehouses is going up as deliveries are going up. And there's this example, the picture on the top is in Lyon in France. And it's really interesting. They've got sort of multiple companies that can access it and use the space for completing deliveries. But they've also got Renault Trucks is putting in place in that hotel an e-truck repair and maintenance, like a garage, also space for repair and maintenance of e-cargo bikes. And then on top of the kind of warehouse logistics activities, you will have other uses like offices or shops or things like that. So I don't know that much about these, but I think they're a really interesting idea of, as we're moving towards zero emission logistics, and how do you kind of create the space to help people transition to your smaller and electric vehicles for that last mile. And that is it from me. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Catherine. Those were great examples, and I love all the actionable ideas that cities can use to learn and take part in medium and heavy-duty electrification projects. So super inspiring stories there. Now to provide a bit more of a case study for medium heavy-duty charging. and how we can begin planning and taking action for that phase of electrification. We have Michelle Avery, the Vice President of External Affairs in North America with InRide. Michelle has over 18 years of automotive OEM and IoT experience. Prior to InRide, she was Vice President of Global Automotive Strategies and Products at Aris. She's a member of the board of Future of Automotive Security and Technology Research and was instrumental in the development, launch, and operation of Toyota's telematics products in the US, including Safety Connect, Lexus Inform, and Toyota Intune. Michelle holds a BS from Pennsylvania State University and an MA in economics from the University of San Francisco. Michelle, take it away.
Wow, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you both to Rick and Catherine for those incredibly informative presentations. Could we go to the slides, please? Excellent, thank you. And also thank you, ECBC, for holding this webinar. It's your programs are really wonderful. We've been great partners of yours, and really appreciate everything that you all do on this. A little bit about InRide. Our mission at InRide is to make the Earth a better place through intelligent movement. We are creating sustainable solutions for heavy-duty transportation. And we're doing this because we have to. We all know it's an imperative to reduce carbon in shipping, which contributes 7% to global emissions. What often doesn't get talked about is there's a lot of market demand. More shipping companies are not just setting environmental sustainability goals, but they're also looking at the market demand for these trucks, knowing that you get more efficiencies from digitalization and that you're never going to meet these goals unless you're doing it with electric trucks. Now, InRide, we are moving goods in the US as well as in Europe for many name brands, and we are growing rapidly. We've already driven over 4 million miles and over 1 million in the US. To give you an idea, the market for road freight, it's huge. It's like a $4 trillion market, and it is really ripe for electrification. So I think Rick was really pointing out that it is really just right for electrification. Now, given our geographic targets, InRide expects our market to be easily worth $250 billion. Now, at InRide, we're not targeting all segments. We focus on grocery retail, on consumer packaged goods, and industrial segments. These segments tend to be aligned with carbon reduction. They have constant flows, and they're at the ranges that are ideal for EV trucks. Market demand for zero emissions trucking is also driven by regulations, as well as the commitment companies have made to reduce carbon, and also by those forward-looking companies who know change is coming. They do tend to be larger multinationals who see the regulations in the EU and in California, and who know that the rest of the world is going to follow. They also know that they're gaining competitive advantages by switching to electric trucks now. And that includes better utilization, greater efficiencies, an opportunity to improve their processes, and to avoid stranded asset risks, which diesel trucks are going to be. They're going to be an asset that must be abandoned. But shifting from using diesel trucks to electric trucks, it's not easy. It does require a change to how businesses operate today. You cannot simply replace your fleet, add some charging, and think that the problem is solved. There is a lot more planning that is required, and frankly, many companies have to digitize the way they do business to be able to fully take advantage of all the cost-saving opportunities that switching to electric has to offer. At InRide, we are that transformation partner for sustainable electric freight with a solution and a pricing that makes business sense for now. At InRide, we do not sell trucks. We sell full end-to-end solutions that includes trucks, human-driven and autonomous, charging, which I'm going to focus the bulk of this conversation on, but we also handle operations and we handle the digitalization. Saga is our digitalization platform that really oversees all of the operations driver instructions. And it's also our planning tool as we work to determine which of those lanes that the trucks are going to operate in that can be readily electrified. And it also helps us determine where to place chargers, because obviously electric trucks don't work without charging. And it's one of our biggest areas for partnering. Because we run the largest fleet of heavy-duty electric trucks in the US and Europe, we have learned that you have to solve for charging infrastructure first before you can scale to great numbers. InRide takes this data-driven approach. We analyze and understand how charging fits into an overall solution for the shippers. We show shippers how to electrify their current network. And then we go in and we develop joint business plans that factor in those changes as well as proof points that it's working, that it is driving utilization and efficiencies. We develop transformation assessments together with our shipping company. It does a couple things. It secures greater buy-in for the changes that are necessary. It also helps define joint metrics for success, determines timelines, and identifies those explicit conditions necessary for expansion. And this is at the heart of InRide, Saga. It pulls together all the data necessary to make these decisions about fleet placement, routes, charging, and driving instructions. We know that electric trucks are not only better for the environment, that they're easier and more pleasant to drive. I think Rick was talking about that in his presentation. And we know that they have the added benefit of a considerably lower total cost of ownership, which does allow for better unit economics. Saga helps us capitalize on better unit economics with that higher utilization, because at the end of the day, sustainability is not sustainable if it's not affordable. And efficiency and utilization drive that affordability. Saga also helps us manage uptime as well as energy cost. We can be super precise on energy demand, on the location, timing, and the utilization of that charging infrastructure. Knowing the details of specific energy demand, it's absolutely powerful. That is what helps us determine the best place for charging infrastructure. Because one size, it does not fit all for charging. It is complicated. It's often that long pole in the tent, and it requires a lot of thoughtful planning. So we work hand in hand with our customers, and we install charging on their sites if that's the best place. And it also helps us identify where the best locations are for hub charging that's suitable for multiple customers. And what we do is we look for density in these shipping lanes, and then we build out capacity in those areas. Regional hubs can drive higher utilization and they can reduce costs, which we can then pass on, thereby driving more demand. Charging density also allows us greater flexibility in how we utilize our fleet. Now, we're not seeking just to add more trucks to the road. We're seeking to use the fewest number of trucks to the maximum amount possible. We really only want to move full loads in all movements. And believe it or not, it's really hard. Current logistic operations are highly fragmented, and the majority of trucks on the road, they're not fully utilized. So there is enormous room for improvement. Linwood, California. It's our first supercharging station in the United States, and it's where we are delivering on improved shipping, where we're transforming the industry. A little bit about the site. It has 65 dispensers, 7.2 megawatt capacity, and we're already reducing CO2 in the area. It is strategically located to serve the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach with a capacity of 200 trucks. We're currently serving Maersk at the station, and it was built with our partner Volterra. Now, all of the 65 smart chargers are DC fast chargers, about 180 kilowatt charge rate. And beyond enabling the trucks to recharge between shipments, our smart charger station offers truck drivers a lounge with all the amenities that they need, as well as providing them critical information such as charge status, remaining time, power output, and performance. Today's a little bit of a preview. We're going to do our grand opening next week on April 23rd. And we're going to be joined by California Go Biz, by the California Energy Commission, just to name a few of the folks who are going to help us do our first ever grand plug-in of the largest charging station in California for heavy duty trucks. And if you want to join us, here's how you can register. Partnering with Enride really allows our customers to electrify operations straight from the get-go without having to make heavy investments in vehicles or in charging infrastructure. And thank you all for the opportunity to explain a little bit about our service offering and to share more about our first charging station in the US.
Thank you, Michelle. Great timing. We got a preview right before the big unveiling. But that was a super great story and a very scalable model that others can use to learn from and to prepare for taking on charging stations for their fleets as well. Lastly, before we head into the Q&A, reminder to keep sending in those questions. We wanted to give folks a bit more information about what's happening at the federal level around medium heavy duty electrification and share with you some of the programs and resources available through the Electrification Coalition to get started and learn more. So Alma Meckler-Pacheco, EC's Freight Electrification Associate, will tell us more. Alma's work is focused on supporting the Electric Freight Consortium and accelerating freight electrification at scale. Prior to the EC, she conducted research on electric vehicles at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis. Here, she assisted researchers on a variety of research projects focused on increasing consumer engagement and awareness of light-duty electric vehicles. Alma holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science and management with a minor in economics from UC Davis. Alma, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. I'm super excited to be on the call today to share a little more information about the Electrification Coalition's electric freight initiatives, as well as give some federal highlights and updates as it relates to medium and heavy duty electrification efforts. So let's go to the slides. So to kick things off, I just wanted to give an overview of the 4 components of our electric freight program at the EC, and then we'll dive into the specifics of all these throughout the presentation. But at the EC, we have 2 consortiums or coalitions, the Electric Freight Consortium and then our Port Electrification Network. And this is really how we aggregate all the key stakeholders involved in a certain area of freight electrification to identify solutions and work to overcome some of the barriers to freight electrification currently. And then we also do a lot of policy advocacy, both at the federal and state level. So the EC works in 10 states throughout the US, and we are advocating for supportive EV policies for medium and heavy duty vehicles, as well as engaging with electric utilities to create programs and incentives for charging infrastructure. And then lastly, we do provide technical support, both one-on-one with our partners, and then also through public resources and tools that we post on our website. So first coalition that I wanted to highlight was Electric Freight Consortium. This is a forum for collaboration between the EC and our private sector partners to ultimately advance medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. So on this slide, you can see some of our members that we engage with. We really collaborate with a range of freight stakeholders, including shippers, carriers, OEMs, EVSE providers, and warehouse owners as well. And so the EFC meets monthly for working group meetings that focus on a range of topics such as policy, advocacy, electric utility engagement, and technology development. And then we also meet quarterly to discuss advancements in freight electrification. And then our second coalition is the Port Electrification Network. This one was more recently launched in February of this year. And the goal with the Port Electrification Network, or PEN as we call it, is to ultimately facilitate the effective deployment of electric port equipment. And this is again by creating a platform for port stakeholders to share successes and challenges in electrification. And so members of the Port Electrification Network include port authorities, vehicle and equipment manufacturers, shippers and carriers, and logistic providers as well. So similar type of members to the Electric Freight Consortium, but definitely focusing in on companies and partners who work more closely with port operations and port electrification. And members of the Port Electrification Network meet monthly to discuss various topics in port electrification. So that includes drayage and cargo handling equipment electrification, EV charging infrastructure deployment, microgrids and battery storage, and then also policy and funding opportunities. Since there is a lot of federal funding out there right now for port electrification, this has definitely been a focus of a lot of our meetings so far. So with that, I also wanted to highlight one of the federal funding opportunities that is currently open right now. And this has been definitely top of mind for a lot of the partners that we work with. So we wanted to share some information on this program. So the Clean Ports Program is a new $3 billion EPA grant program that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are 2 notices of funding opportunities that were released earlier this year in February. So one is a zero emission technology deployment competition that has $2.79 billion allocated for this. And that's really for zero emission port equipment and infrastructure. And then the second competition is for $150 million, and this is for climate and air quality planning at ports. And so eligible applicants include port authorities, state, regional, local, or tribal agencies, air pollution control agencies, and then also private entities, but a private entity must apply in partnership with one of the above mentioned eligible applicants. And then in terms of some important dates for this program, there is going to be an upcoming webinar next week that the EPA is hosting to answer some frequently asked questions for the Clean Ports program. So encourage those who are interested in learning more from the EPA about this program to attend that webinar. And then the application deadline is coming up. It's on May 28th, so later next month. And then in September is when the EPA anticipates notifying those who were selected for the awards. And then December is when the awards will be distributed. And there's also a Build America, Buy America waiver out right now for the equipment funded through the Clean Ports program. So this is under review. Comments were due earlier this week, so we are still waiting on the EPA for final approval of this waiver or to see a final decision on the waiver for BABA requirements. And kind of on these federal funding opportunities, we wanted to highlight some additional sources of federal funding since there is so much out right now for both port electrification, but then more broadly, just medium and heavy duty electrification efforts. So there's the Port Infrastructure Development Program. This is an existing program. So the $2.25 billion shown here is new funding that was allotted through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This one is open right now, so applications are due by May 10th, a little bit before the Clean Ports program. And this is really to improve the safety and efficiency and reliability of the movement of goods in and around a port. So we've seen electrification projects fit into these types of funding opportunities. And then the second is the reduction of truck emissions at port facilities. This is a new $400 million Federal Highway Administration grant program that works to reduce truck idling and truck emissions at ports. So definitely includes port electrification. And then there's a Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. This is also an existing program, so there's an additional $60 million now available for the EPA to fund grants and rebates that reduce emissions from diesel engines. And then lastly, there's the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. This is also a new $1 billion to replace existing Class 6 and 7 heavy duty vehicles with zero emission models. And we are expecting the NOFO to come out soon for this one as well, so stay tuned for that. And then on the right side of this slide, I have the EC's EV Funding Finder. So this is a tool that helps eligible recipients sort through all the available federal funds for transportation electrification and identify what they are most eligible for. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to check out that resource. And then also some other federal updates that we wanted to highlight were the new EPA's greenhouse gas emission standards for heavy duty vehicles, phase 3. The EC did a lot of campaigning for the adoption of these standards, including a business letter to the White House. So we were definitely excited to see these finally be released and finalized. But these standards are technology neutral, performance-based greenhouse gas emission standards for heavy duty vehicles. The vehicles covered in these standards are Class 2B through 8 vocational vehicles, and then the sleeper cab tractors and day cab tractors. And they're covered for model years 2027 through 2032. And since this is technology neutral, manufacturers can really choose what set of emission control technologies they want to utilize to meet these standards and what really helps and meets the needs of their consumers. And so, as you can see from this table on the slide, the EPA did allow for more flexibility in the earlier years for a few of these vehicles, such as the heavy vocational and the day cab tractors and sleeper cab tractors. This is comparing it to the phase 2 emission standards, the earlier standards. And for example, for the sleeper cab tractors, there are 3 years where there aren't going to be any changes to the requirements for them. So there's definitely increased flexibility and a more gradual phase in for some of these standards for those harder to electrify sectors and duty cycles of vehicles. So the EPA did this really recognizing this is still early for a lot of these vehicle technologies, and there still needs to be deployment of charging infrastructure and refueling options. So there is that built-in flexibility. But from these new standards, we are expecting to see a lot of benefits. So in terms of oil reduction, due to the adoption of EVs and more fuel efficient vehicles, we expect to see a reduction in oil consumption from the transportation sector and specifically from those medium and heavy duty vehicles. And then also for climate and public health benefits, the EPA anticipates that from these standards, there will be approximately 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions avoided from 2027 through 2055. And then additionally, for the 72 million people who live near major truck freight routes, there would be a reduction in air pollution. And then for fleet savings, additionally, the EPA estimates that the heavy duty industry will see annualized savings of 3.5 billion compared to an annualized cost of 1.1 billion. So definitely a lot of great benefits that are going to be coming out of these phase 3 standards. And then lastly, I just wanted to go over another tool that the EC offers for our partners and is located on our website as well. This is an electric freight dashboard that the EC produced in collaboration with Atlas Public Policy. So this dashboard provides a look at the state of freight electrification in the US, including information on funding availability, vehicle and charging station deployment, and then medium and heavy duty vehicle use statistics. So it provides information both at a national and state level and insights on the current deployment and market opportunities for freight electrification. So I really encourage folks to also check out this resource. It provides a lot of great information on medium and heavy duty electrification and does give a lot of great statistics and data to help our work in this space. But yeah, with that, just wanted to say thank you. My contact information is on here as well. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of the initiatives or policy updates that I mentioned today. But thanks again, Alyssa, for the time to speak.
Great, thank you, Alma. As we can see, there's exciting advancements happening at the federal level, the state level, the local level. It's a lot of really great ways to get involved. With that, we have some time for a few questions, and we've gotten some great questions in the chat for each speaker. So the first question that we got was geared for Rick, and it asks, is there any place for 90 kilowatt chargers or less in the freight space?
Yes, it depends on your duty cycle, but vehicles like delivery vans and box trucks that are low mileage and are sitting for 10 to 12 hours a day are great for lower level charging. In one facility I visited, they had 75 kilowatt chargers, and because the vehicle sat for 12 hours a night, they could charge at about 5 kilowatts. So, it really depends on your duty cycle. There are a lot of opportunities for lower level charging.
Great, thanks so much. So definitely applicable for those local level projects. Thank you. For Catherine, we got the question, what have been the biggest barriers for launching projects in Latin America and Europe, and how do those compare to the barriers you see in the US projects?
Yeah, thank you. So for Latin America, I don't work directly on it, but I have teammates that are, and from what I understand, finance was one of the biggest barriers that was identified. And within that, even aspects of, for example, currency risk. So when you have currencies that are perhaps, you need that protection or like linked to the dollar, but also residual value of these trucks. So we don't have as much evidence of what they'll be worth years from now. From a city perspective, one thing that we've found is that this is a newer topic for a lot of our Latin American cities. And so there is still work to be done in terms of building that knowledge base and understanding of why they should be working on this topic and what they can do about it. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be shared from the US and Europe on that. But one thing that I think is worth noting is that in Latin America versus the US, I would say there's probably more attention or awareness on air pollution in a lot of Latin American cities than the US. I think around the world, there's still a really big need to connect trucks with that air pollution as a main driving factor in moving towards zero emission. But I think that's an opportunity in Latin America. So I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Yeah, certainly. And I definitely think that knowledge gaps are something we see regionally too. So it's no surprise that, going international, you're going to see those as well. And it's something that we try to overcome at every project level. So great point. For Michelle, we had a question about the Linwood station. Super excited about that. Can you share more about the planning and siting of that facility and any particular challenges you ran into and how you solved them?
Oh boy, that's a big topic. I'll try to be brief on this one. First off, I really want to give a big shout out to the California Air Resource Board, CARB. They've done a couple things that are really important. They've created some policies and incentives that are really driving the adoption of electric heavy-duty trucking, as well as enabling the building of charging infrastructure. The advanced clean truck rules and the advanced clean fleet rules, particularly when tied together with the LCFS, the low carbon fuel standards, which allows for credits and liquidity in the market. Those are powerful combination of regulatory programs that can really that is actually spurring the development of charging infrastructure. When you get down to siting, you have the issue of land. And the reality is nobody actually wants heavy duty trucks in their neighborhoods, even if they are quiet and even if they are clean. So that is one thing that you really have to work on, is finding the right location. We were lucky in the Linwood site with our partner Volterra to find a really great site that could service those ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and then on up the 710 and out to where all the warehouses are as you head east. So it was a really great location. We worked with Southern California Edison to really get the power up and running, to get that 7 megawatts. It takes time. And I think one thing that a lot of utilities and regulators can do better is really setting those expectations on the realistic estimates of time and cost, as well as how some of the public monies that are available will work through the system, including these make-ready programs. If the utilities were to have a dedicated account group that is dedicated to serving medium and heavy duty charging projects, that would be great. If they also allowed for multi-tenant fleet charging projects that are greater than 2 megawatts, they can help fast track those types of programs. That would have been a huge help. But I also think the utility make-ready programs, if they can cover the majority of the cost, 85%, that allows for things like step-down transformers, overhead lines, utility meters, but also allowing the utilities to invest in large-scale infrastructure, but also benefit from the upside of predictable energy sales, including any adjustment to ratepayer impact measures, be fantastic. Really allow for rate-based investments of grid site upgrades, as well as all ratepayers, frankly, benefiting from heavy-duty fleet electrification. A lot of times we don't think about that. We think about air quality and other things, but there are additional benefits, including how much more quiet these trucks can be in your neighborhoods. So those are some of the things that we've overcome with our partners, and it's been great collaborative effort. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question, and definitely a lot to cover in that short amount of time, so appreciate that. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for Q&A, but the speakers have each included their emails in presentations, so for more specific questions, feel free to reach out. We'd like to thank our speakers for their time and expertise today, and thank you all for coming, and we invite you to stick around for announcements about the EC's upcoming webinars and programs, and how you can stay up to date as we anticipate Clean Heavy Duty program and other announcements coming out soon. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.